afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us on a dreary day here in Southern Ontario. I'd like to thank you all for coming and tuning in on a talk on optimizing brain health through mindfulness and mind-body practices. So this talk is part of our Mindfulness Friday series that happens over the next 8 weeks until June 24th. So if you are available at 12:15 Eastern time, we would encourage you to join us for a short 15-minute practice each Friday to put some of the points and skills that Shrey is going to be talking about today into practice. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Christine Kennedy, and I work in the Office of Alumni Engagement. And it is my great honor to introduce our speaker today, Shrey Vazir. Shrey is a proud McMaster grad and is a registered physiotherapist and a mindfulness meditation facilitator. And he is the founder of Mind Body Horizons. With over 10 years experience in mindfulness practice, Shrey has been leading our mindfulness sessions. If you're interested in listening to a 12-minute mindfulness practice, we will provide you with a link so you can listen to it at your leisure. Shrey, thanks for joining us again.
Thank you for that warm welcome, Christine, and welcome everyone to our 8-week series on mindfulness. So for the next 30 minutes, I'll be focusing on a very timely topic. Christine reached out to me to ask about this as well, about brain health, and it seems to be a very popular and very vital topic to talk about nowadays. I recently did a course on mind-body medicine at Harvard as a certificate program, and one of the biggest themes was actually about brain health and optimizing it. And time again, they touched on mindfulness and other mind-body practices such as yoga, which we'll talk about in this talk, and how that affects and changes our brain. So we'll be talking about that during this talk. So the outline, just to briefly go over, we'll talk about why brain health, why is it important? A paradigm shift. We've come to, in the last 10-15 years, we've learned so much about neuroscience in our brains, and there's a huge shift in how we think about it and how we change. We'll talk about the 6 pillars of healthy aging, and then we'll dive into what mindfulness meditation is, briefly for those of you that are new. We'll talk about the latest neuroscience and the research from Harvard, and then we'll talk about the 6 ways mindfulness can literally rewire and change your brain. At the end, we'll end off with a 3-minute breathing space, and then we'll leave it up to question and answer. I won't get into too much detail, just a brief slide on why I'm here. I was diagnosed with a pain condition called fibromyalgia 12 years ago, and it led me on this whole journey through trying different various interventions. I've seen physios, chiros, I've tried acupuncture, seen pain doctors, neurologists, and at the end of it, there were no real answers about why I was dealing with this pain. And through trial and error and lots of different things, I landed on mindfulness, and that was 10 years ago. Since then, I've been practicing, and I knew later on I wanted to train in it, study in it. So since the last 5 years, I train as a mindfulness facilitator, and I've been teaching patients, professionals, therapists, and that's pretty much been my mission since then. And just last year, like I mentioned, I did a certificate at Harvard in the mind-body medicine program, and the science that's come out just blew my mind away, and that's why we're here today. So why brain health? Why are we talking about the brain so much nowadays? As we know, our brain is pretty much our power and our control center, and it's involved in all of these things: memory, attention, language. It creates who we are, creates our identity, controls the rest of our organs, helps us see, speak, hear, move, all of these things. And it pretty much shapes our overall health and well-being as well. So if we can influence our brain in some way, we can influence the rest of our bodies as well. Another timely talk, as I mentioned, in that in the next 20 years, Canada's population, especially the seniors population, is expected to grow by almost 70%. So these are the baby boomers population that are now slowly passing the age of 65. And it's becoming more and more crucial to preserve our brain health and promote healthy aging. We've seen through numerous scientific literature that age-related diseases and changes are occurring widespread, and there's a lot of ways we can prevent these diseases, which we'll talk about. Just briefly, brain health has three main functions: physical function, cognitive function, emotional function. Physical meaning mobility and how we move in our day-to-day tasks. Cognitive meaning learning and memory and our intellect. Emotional being our mental health and our coping. So our brain health really covers all of these factors. Now, just briefly about the myths of brain health. We used to think back in the days that losing brain function was a normal part of aging. We just think, I'm forgetting, hence, I'm aging, or, I'm not as sharp as before. We used to think that was part of normal aging, but that's not true. We also used to think that brain health is biological and there's nothing we can do about it. It's all genetics. Whatever I have, and I have to deal with it. Also not true. In the past, our treatments were also focused on disease, just disease, and how we can treat these conditions, such as Alzheimer's, dementia, different brain conditions as well. Now, there's a huge paradigm shift since the last 10, 15 years, and we're talking about how we can maintain brain function as we age. It's not it's not about how we can deal with it, but how we can actually make positive influences in our brain. Now we know that through neuroplasticity, we can actually modify our brain, we can actually override our biology. And nowadays, there's a whole focus on prevention of brain disease, not just treating it when it actually happens, but can we go back, or can we rewind, go 15, 20 years early and prevent dementia, prevent Alzheimer's? So this brings us to the 6 pillars of brain health. This is seen time and time again. These 6 things show up when looking at literature in general, and I've highlighted them here. Number 1 is exercise and movement. We know exercise is good for us. As a physiotherapist, this is also my bread and butter. 2, social engagement. People that have healthy relationships with families, friends, their community, generally they tend to do better in their health and wellness and to preserve their brain health as they age. Healthy diet, we know sleep, huge in terms of our overall health and wellness, very underrated. I think in the world of go, and we often tend to prioritize work over rest and relaxation or sleep. But I think sleep is very, very important, as a lot of research suggests. Mental stimulation is another pillar, and that means, can we continuously try to learn something new, learning a new language, learning a new skill. Those kinds of things continues to preserve our brain health and actually improves it. And then the 6th piece, which is why we're here and which is why I'm here, it's about mindfulness and stress management. So that's what I'm going to be focusing on. Just a caveat though, there are other mind-body practices that are out there that are also heavily researched and studied, such as yoga, Tai Chi, Qigong, Pilates, breathing exercises, visualizations, imagery. There's lots of different variations. The research is here and there, mixed sometimes specifically to different conditions. But today I'm going to be focusing specifically on mindfulness. And that has turned out to be one of the front runners in mind-body practices that are very empirical and very heavily studied. So what is mindfulness? We briefly touched on it at the beginning. This is a wonderful definition by Dr. Jon Kabat-Zinn, who is the founder of the mindfulness-based stress reduction program back in the 1970s. He says, mindfulness is awareness that arises through paying attention, on purpose, in the present moment, non-judgmentally. We've already touched on these, so I won't get into too much detail, but all of the highlighted words I've noted here are crucial to mindfulness. It's not just about calming down or focusing or attention or concentration. It's all of these things. We need to do all of these things in order to be, or in order to practice mindfulness. Just briefly on the origins, mindfulness does come from almost 2,500 years ago, and we can't deny its influence from religious and spiritual institutions from the East, such as Hinduism, Buddhism, Tibetan meditation practices. However, the word mindfulness is not connected with any religion or spirituality. It's an ability that we all possess, that we all have, and that we can all train as well, especially in our modern lives. So how did it get here? From the East to the West, we have two notable figures. Number one is Thich Nhat Hanh, who recently passed away, unfortunately. He was fantastic. His books, his teachings were phenomenal. He took Buddhism and the mindfulness practices from there and turned them into simplified versions that the everyday person can understand. He used to do a lot of retreats all over Europe and France. And one of his students was Dr. Jon Kabat-Zinn, who loved this idea of mindfulness, took those practices, brought it back to the West, and he used to work in Massachusetts. And he devised an 8-week program specifically to treat patients that were not getting better from traditional Western medicine. So patients with stress, anxiety, depression, cancer, chronic pain, you name it, things that were not necessarily getting better. And he did an 8-week program, and he found remarkable changes in these patients. It didn't change their condition 100%, but it taught patients how to cope with it better, and their moods improved. And since then, the research has just taken off, which we'll talk about later. Now, before we talk about specifically what mindfulness looks like, we did a practice today, but there's different versions of mindfulness, which we'll get into the next slide. There's a few myths that I want to point out, and these are very, very important. Mindfulness is not a mystic practice that is meant for Zen masters. I'm sure you're aware, lots of patients, professionals, business leaders, athletes, millions of people around the world are practicing mindfulness now, finally coming to a realization that this thing actually works. Mindfulness is not just about being calm or zenning out. That can be a part of it, but it's more about awareness and responding to the stresses around you. It's not religious or hokey pokey. In another note here, mindfulness can only be practiced sitting down and eyes closed. That's also not true. We'll talk about a few variations of mindfulness that can be done in your day-to-day lives, in your activities. You can do mindfulness while walking. Mindfulness is not just relaxing or passive. It's almost like an exercise. Think about when you exercise your muscles, it's an active process. You're doing it purposefully. It's uncomfortable. It can be difficult at first, but those benefits come afterwards. Mindfulness is not about blocking your thoughts, clearing your thoughts, or having no thoughts. This is all false. You'll read lots and lots on Google that will say it's, you have to clear your thoughts to meditate. It's not true. It's about letting those thoughts come and then letting them go. We can't stop them. I've been practicing mindfulness for over 12 years. I can't stop my thoughts. We're not supposed to stop them. And last but not all, mindfulness is not hypnosis. So what is mindfulness? And there's few variations of it, as mentioned here. Number one, formal practice, which we just did today. We did a 10-minute body scan and breathing meditation. That's a formal practice of mindfulness. These can range from a minute-long meditation, which I often do when I'm seeing clients or patients. I'll do a minute meditation. But these can also be as long as a 7-day silent retreat, which is also a form of formal practice. And then there's variations of it, as I've mentioned, mindful movements, loving kindness, which all of these will practice in the next 7 weeks that we have together. There's also informal practice. This is just as important. There was a study done at Harvard that showed that our mind is on autopilot mode for 47% of the time. That's almost half of the time that our mind is wandering, going about in circles, thinking about what I have to do or what I did in the past. Informal practice is about turning that autopilot mode off. It's about being with your loved one in front of you as they are, not zoning them out, or thinking about the last time you were eating a meal. How often does it happen that you've eaten your meal and you have no idea what you just ate or when it finished, because you were watching TV or you were on your phone? I do that too. I'm guilty of it. But those are examples of autopilot mode, and informal mindfulness is about turning that mode off and being very attentive and focused on the activity that you're doing, such as brushing your teeth, walking, eating, all of those things. And then there's also the third type of mindfulness, which is what we call mini mindfulness techniques. We'll briefly touch on these over the next couple of weeks as well. These can range from 30 seconds to 3 minutes, where you're doing elements of mindfulness through very brief practices, which are just as effective. So take a small, actually, we'll take a shift of gears here, and we're going to dive into the research that I've been mentioning, and the ways that mindfulness changes our brain. As you can see from this graph, since the 1960s or 1970s, the amount of research that has been done on mindfulness has risen and increased exponentially. And as you can see, this is just from 2022. These numbers are just going up and up and up. And every year they're doing close to 3,000 studies on mindfulness. And why are they doing that? Because they're finding changes, they're finding differences, and all over all different industries, like rehabilitation, psychology, psychiatry, general health and wellness, brain health, right? Now, this is what I want to focus on for the next maybe 5-10 minutes before we open it up to questions. This is how, these are the different 6 ways that mindfulness can literally change your brain and rewire it. And we'll go through each of them in just a bit. So it reduces your stress and fear, which makes you happier. It boosts your memory and learning, boosts your cognitive function. It prevents gray matter atrophy, which we'll talk about. Preserves your DNA. It can slow aging. Ultimately, it rewires our brain to be happier and healthier. Now, this is a really, really cool study that was done at Harvard. They looked at 8 weeks of mindfulness training, and they did these functional MRI studies of patients or participants, and they found that in just 8 weeks, there was a specific area in our brains, which we call the amygdala, which is involved in fear and stress, which is, that's the part that makes us fight or flight, right? When we're under stress. That region showed decreased activation after 8 weeks of mindfulness training. And that's remarkable. We don't see those kinds of things with other interventions. Number 2 the way that mindfulness changes our brain, and I know there's a lot of words here, but it improves our learning and memory. Another study that was done looked at an 8-week mindfulness program, and then they did MRI studies. And as you can see in the highlight, in the bolded and underlined section here, the third bullet, it confirmed that there were increases in gray matter concentration within a specific area, which is called the hippocampus. And that's the area that's responsible for learning, memory, and emotion regulation as well. So pretty much just the way exercise can strengthen our muscles and cause our muscles to grow, physically, similar things are happening with mindfulness practice inside of your brain. Specific areas are literally thickening, and within a matter of a couple of weeks, and that thickening is correlated and affecting our our cognitive function. So we can be sharper, we can remember better, we can problem solve better. The third way mindfulness changes our brain is improved attention, problem solving, cognitive function. Similar to the previous hippocampus study, they did another study. It was a 3-day mindfulness meditation intensive program. And what they found was there were changes in the connections between certain areas in your, what we call the prefrontal cortex, which is the front part of your brain, which is what differentiates us from other mammals. This is the part that's responsible for problem solving, analyzing, investigating. It makes us humans, and that is where we get our brain power from. And what they found was that with just 3 days of intensive mindfulness meditation, there was increased activation between certain areas of our prefrontal cortex, which improved the participants' attention and their problem solving, which is phenomenal. Now, this one really I came across this recently during my my program, and I was really blown away by this study. I'm gonna skip to the next slide. Essentially, as we age, the brain gray matter, which is where our brain neuron cell bodies are lying, which is like the thicker part of our brain, usually develops fully by the age of 20. And then after that, that gray matter slowly starts to decline all the way until we hit 70, 80s, right? As you can see in the graph below, that's the brain gray matter volume. Going back, what they found was that long-term meditators were actually able to maintain that gray matter for longer. So there was potential age-defying effects of meditation within our brains, which is, no pun intended, mind-blowing. Fifth way mindfulness changes our brain is by reducing stress and preserving our DNAs. Quickly about what we call telomeres. Perhaps you've heard them in your biology classes back in the days, but these are the ends of your DNA that are pretty much protecting your DNA. I'm going to skip to the next slide. They're like the tips of your shoelaces, the plastic part. It pretty much keeps your entire strand of DNA intact. With age, essentially, there's progressive shortening of those telomeres. So those telomeres at the end, those green sections, actually get shorter and shorter and shorter as you age. And biology researchers have, said that that's like a molecular clock. It's the marker of aging. And essentially, from the top to the bottom, as you can see, the DNA, which is the black part in the middle, and then you have the green telomeres on the sides, they get shorter and shorter and shorter as you age. But not only that, this shortening is actually worsened with things like chronic stress, smoking, poor diet, lack of physical activity, not enough sleep, all those kinds of things that are modifiable. And essentially, if we can reduce stress or remove it, or deal with stress better through mindfulness, we can essentially preserve those telomeres for longer and actually preserve our DNAs. And that's essentially what this study found. Long-term mindfulness practice has protective effects on our telomeres, which is again, this is just a simple practice of focusing on your breathing, for example, in a non-judgmental way, focusing on your thoughts, emotions. You're not really doing much, right? You're sitting there, and this has profound effects on our biology, on our brains, on our DNAs. It's remarkable. Now, the sixth way, the final way mindfulness affects us is through what we call neuroplasticity. As I mentioned earlier, all of these brain changes are happening because we're rewiring the brain. Basically, what neuroplasticity means is neurons that fire together, wire together. For example, if you're learning, let's say, a new sport like tennis, in order for you to become good at a specific type of swing or specific type of shot, you have to practice that over and over and over. Basically, your neurons are getting stronger and stronger at doing that muscle pattern over and over. Same thing with if you're learning a musical instrument or a new language or a new skill. They call it the 10,000 hour practice rule. Basically, you have to put in hours for your neurons to start firing and wiring together. And that's essentially what we're doing with mindfulness. Every time you're practicing mindfulness, every time your brain or your mind starts to wander to something, a problem or a thought, and you catch yourself, each time you're doing that, your connections are getting stronger in your brain. Your attention muscle inside of your brain is getting stronger and stronger and stronger. So when you are practicing mindfulness and you find that, oh, I can't stop my mind from wandering, it's a good sign. It's an opportunity for you to strengthen those mental muscles. So you can work on that. As soon as you drift, just come back. As soon as you drift, come back, and you get stronger and stronger. So I've talked a lot, and I just want to put out some key messages and takeaways from this talk before we open it up for question and answer. We have maybe 3 minutes. Over here, as you can see, our brain is our most vital organ, but our brain is adaptable and plastic, and we now know the pillars to support it. Mindfulness and mind-body practices are one of those pillars that can support our health and our brains in many ways. It rewires in different ways that we've just talked about, making us happier, healthier, sharper, also while slowing down age-related processes. And I do want to mention here that mindfulness is no longer considered an alternative practice. That word is no longer applicable to mindfulness and meditation, and as it's becoming more and more integrated with modern medicine. I use mindfulness with my patients at a pain clinic that I work at, and all of the doctors refer these patients to me because they know that mindfulness works. And last but not all, it takes as little as 10 minutes of practice per day to see some benefits. I don't think we'll have time for this, but what we will do is just open it up to questions, any comments, any insights.
Well, Shrey, as always, that was wonderful. Thank you for the talk. And it fit quite nicely with some of the other topics we had during this Rejuvenate series. We had Matthew Walker, who is an expert at UC Berkeley, and he did a talk on sleep, which is one of the 6 pillars. And Dr. Jennifer Heiss, who is in our science department. She is a professor in kinesiology and the director of the Fit Neuro Lab. And she did a talk on Monday about the mind-body connection. And so again, exercise, talking about exercise and how that really impacts the brain in very positive ways, and the mindfulness. So we had 3 of the 6 pillars. And of course, the social aspect is what we do with alumni engagement, right? The social.
There you go. That too. Yeah.
So it's all there. So we did have a question. George had a question. Let me just go through the chat here. So George wants to know, Shrey, have you tried any biofeedback devices, example, the Muse device? If so, what are your thoughts on the use of these devices?
Sorry, I missed that a little.
The Muse? Have you heard?
I have, yes. I have heard of, there's lots of different types of devices that are being used. And essentially what those devices are about giving you real-time feedback on your brain activity as you're doing it. So for example, let's say you do a 10-minute mindfulness practice and you have this device on, it's detecting brain activity. Essentially, you can see from the beginning of the practice to the end of the practice. At the beginning, your activity will be like up and down, lots of firing. At the end, it might be calmer, right? So essentially, it's a good way. It's a good feedback system for people to practice, so they can see in real time what changes are happening. Another simple example is if you're wearing a Fitbit, you can track your heart rate. from the beginning of your practice to the end, and you'll notice, usually for me, my heart rate drops by 15, almost 10 to 15 beats per minute. And that's showing you that, there's a relaxation response that's activated in your body as you're practicing this. So yeah, I hope that helps answer that question. These devices are not necessary; they're just an add-on. They can help, but by no means they're required.
Yeah, an interesting way to see how your body is reacting or not reacting to the mindfulness practice.
That's right. Yeah.
So I know we've had this one before in the past when you have done the mindfulness sessions, but I'll ask it again. So are there any apps that you would recommend that would help for mindfulness? There's so many available. It would be good to know what
There's
a
lots.
professional in the field would recommend. So what do you recommend, Shrey?
Yeah. So there's quite a few. There's the Calm app. There's Insight Timer. Maybe I could type that in there. Calm is good. There's Headspace. Again, I'm not, these might be paid or free. Insight Timer is completely free. So that's a good one. There's Stop, Breathe, and Think. Some of my recordings are actually on Insight Timer. If you want to give it a look, I have recordings on it that are completely free if you want to try them out. But there's, it's about trial and error, trying to find a voice or a guide that you resonate with as you start your practice, right? Essentially, after practicing for a couple of weeks, the goal is for you to do self-guided meditations where you're doing it by yourself, essentially. But initially, it's always good to have some guidance through apps. So these are all ideas that you can use.
So Donna would like to know, how does mindfulness help with pain?
That's a great question, and this is why I got into this field. This is why I'm here in general. About when it comes to pain, there's a lot of ways that mindfulness can affect us. I'll give you my personal experience through dealing with pain. Is there's pain, like the physical pain that you get, but then there's layers of dread, anxiety, emotional, social effects. There's a lot of layers of pain. So although it might not affect the actual pain per se, there are studies that show that it can actually reduce that pain, but it actually affects these other layers of dread, worry, stress, anxiety, sleep. And if you can help all of those, you're left with a minor portion of pain that is much more manageable. Essentially, it changes your relationship with pain, is what I like to say with my patients that are dealing with chronic pain, let's say for years. It teaches them to be more accepting, kind, compassionate for themselves towards their pain, rather than fighting it or resisting it. And in that process, mindfulness offers a whole new perspective and an approach to coping with the pain versus just trying to push it away with pain medications, which are also, of course, important. But yeah, just so I mean, I could do a whole talk on mindfulness and pain, but that's kind of the nutshell. It affects stress as well, which can ultimately help with pain as well. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Shrey. So Donna, hopefully that helps.
Yeah.
Eileen asked a question, and I remember when we first started to do mindfulness last summer, the same question was asked. So I'm going to ask it again. Yeah. How does mindfulness affect the vagus nerve? Yeah, this is wonderful. So essentially, we have two systems in our body. One is, the sympathetic nervous system, which is your fight or flight, your stress response. That's activated when, let's say, for our ancestors, we had, if a predator is attacking us, our sympathetic system would turn on, help us run away, fight or flight, and we'd be safe. And then the sympathetic nervous system turns off and we're good to go. But in the modern world, that sympathetic nervous system can turn on through a variety of things. Like we have modern problems, right? Worries and stresses and anxieties that our ancestors did not have. So that
system turns on over and over and over. But what we're not focused on in current times is the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the flip side, which is the rest, digest, relax. And that's where the vagus nerve comes into play. When you're practicing mindfulness, when you're practicing meditation, relaxation techniques, you're purposefully activating your parasympathetic nervous system or your vagus nerve. So for example, when we did our mindfulness practice, we started off with deep inhales and then longer exhales. So using our breath, we can actually activate our parasympathetic or our vagus nerve to cause a physiological response in our bodies to actually relax us. So the vagus nerve is 100% involved in how mindfulness can have all of these benefits. Yeah. I hope that helps. That was a long answer, but yeah, hope that helps.
Yeah, so it's all about the activating the parasympathetic nervous system.
That's right. Yeah.
Yes. So George, two questions in the chat that I think are quite interesting. So George again wanted to know if you knew if there are any medical schools that are incorporating mindfulness practice in their curriculum.
Absolutely. So this is becoming more and more popular, I would say, since the last 5 years or so, especially since the pandemic. So I'm involved in the physiotherapy department at University of Toronto, and I do some mindfulness work for them as well. I've done guest lectures, but starting next year, they're making an entire mindfulness curriculum for their students, just for themselves, just for their self-care, right? And it's not like an 8-week intensive program, but they'll have regular monthly touch points on how they can use mindfulness for self-care. That's just one example. Harvard and all the universities there and all the programs there, mindfulness is part and parcel of their program, and it's just becoming more and more intertwined with the education industry as well. Yeah. So yeah, there's a lot of programs, a lot of medical programs that are slowly but surely getting there. Yeah.
I was taking a positive psychology course, which is a 3rd-year course here at McMaster, and our professor did some mindfulness meditation. Again, right, knowing that it's so important to overall mental health and increasing your positive affect or your moods. Yeah.
That's
so
right.
he recorded a few things for us and would always suggest that we go back and listen to those if we were feeling stressed, and we did one in class. Yeah, it was quite good. So to answer George's question, I think it's becoming part of the zeitgeist. I think people in institutions are recognizing that the importance of it, which is a good segue into Helene's question. She knows that mindfulness is a great tool, especially for young people. So how do you get young people interested? Any tips on getting them interested to begin a mindfulness practice?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the research currently, from what I'm aware, a lot of it has been done on adults, and they've shown success, and they're doing large scale studies for kids as well. So it depends on the age group that we're looking at. There are benefits, but they're not as robust as for adults because mindfulness is more of an active, it's simple, but it's complicated kind of process. It takes some advanced kind of level of thinking to kind of practice. Not saying that kids can't do it. There's a lot of programs out there, including Calm, for example. They've actually launched a free, if you're a teacher, and if I'm not wrong, it's free for teachers to use the whole app for their kids, and they have specific programs in there. So let's say from kindergarten to this age, they have specific meditations that are designed for kids from that age, and then it'll be grade 1 to grade 3, grade 4 to grade 6, and onwards. So even within schools and elementary schools, middle schools, they're using mindfulness practices, and again, it's going to take some time, but we'll get there where it's become just a thing that everyone does. Yeah.
Well, I think probably what needs to happen is you need some kind of influencer. As silly as this sounds to older people, you probably need some kind of TikTok or
that's a good point.
Snapchat or something, right? Like if some influencer enjoys it and then can convince the masses, because I have 2 teenage daughters,
right?
Those types of people are quite influential, hence the name. So anyone out there who's an influencer, put it on your TikTok.
Put it on your TikTok. Yeah.
Catherine has a question about music and listening to it during your mindfulness moments. Is that recommended?
I love that. Yeah, that's a great point. So you can listen to any type of music that doesn't have lyrics. For example, if there's lyrics playing, then your mind starts to try to sing along with it. So you want to have background music that's just relaxing. It could be the sound of waves or raindrops or whatever it is. But music is a great idea to kind of help you give you that space. So let's say you're in a noisy environment, or you're at home and you want some time to just practice. It would be great to just put on some music in your headphones and then do this practice. So certain apps actually have the option of doing guided practices with or without music. So really is up to you on how you want to try. There's no right or wrong way of practicing mindfulness, as long as you're practicing for 10 minutes, right? So usually I started off listening to music to help myself when I first started mindfulness, but now I can kind of do it wherever I am, but it's really up to you. Yeah.
Great. Thank you for that. 2 more questions.
Yeah, this is wonderful. I'm loving these questions.
Lots of questions.
Yeah.
So someone anonymous posted this.
Yep.
Do you know if there is any relationship between mindfulness and preventing TIAs?
Oh, okay. So transient ischemic. So TIA is, if I'm not wrong, the full form, transient ischemic attacks. Mini strokes. Right, mini strokes. Yeah. Personally, I'll be honest, I have not seen any specific research for that. But what I do know is that because mindfulness has effects on your physiology and your overall your system, it lowers your heart rate, it lowers your blood pressure, it can improve your heart health overall. So I'm sure, like, if we're talking about, they just haven't done the study because it would need to be like a 15 or 20 year long study to see if there's correlation. But I'm sure if they were to do it, there would be benefits of mindfulness in preventing that. I follow a cardiologist on LinkedIn, and he routinely, he's a cardiologist in the States, and he does mindfulness with all of his patients. He's a heart doctor. He does surgeries for these patients, but he's also a mindfulness trainer. So he instructs his patients to use mindfulness for their heart health. A lot of cardiac programs in Canada, including Sunnybrook, they actually have mindfulness programs now that are for all of their patients available. So not only are these patients doing cardiac rehab, which is exercise and all of those kinds of things, they also have a program for mindfulness because of how it helps our stress levels, which then affects our overall physiology. So I hope that helps. Long and winded answer there, but yeah.
It's certainly not going to be harmful.
Yeah. Okay, great. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm just putting stuff in the chat there too.
No problem. Yeah.
So how many times a week, this is a good question, how many times a week should one practice mindfulness if they are starting out? I think I know what the answer is.
Yeah. Christine, you want to take a stab at it? No.
I'm going to probably say daily, that you need to do it every day. And from what I've learned from you, I mean, this is our 3rd or 4th time together. You start out slow. You start out, you don't need to do 10 or 12 minutes. And you sort of gradually, even 30 seconds or 1 minute, and then, but you're the expert, so I'll let you answer. But
no, that was perfect. I won't add anything else to that, Christine. That was actually perfect. So it's starting off with, a minute or two daily, and then working your way up to 10 minutes per day. Again, as you're starting off, just like, any healthy habit, you want to set yourself up for success. You don't want to set such an out there goal that you just can't meet, because then it deters you from trying again, right? So if I was to say you have to do 20 minutes a day, you're probably not going to do it, or because it's too much. So start off with something small that's doable for you, and then work your way up to 10 minutes. If you miss a day, it's okay. It's not the end of the world, as long as you're consistent and trying to get to a point where you're doing it on a day-to-day basis. Yeah.
So when we were doing this last summer, I think was the first time, I can't even remember, the pandemic, everything just all time sort of stands still. But anyway, at some point it was recommended to me to read a book called Mindfulness for the Fidgety Skeptic.
Skeptics, yeah.
Yep. And it's by
it's Jeff Warren, if I'm not wrong.
Yes.
He's based in Toronto as well.
Yes. Yeah. So he wrote it with an American who was, it's an interesting story, who was a host on like Good Morning America or one of those TV shows, and he had a panic attack while on air.
Yeah.
And his doctor told him it was because he was doing too many drugs like cocaine and weed and stuff like that. And I think the doctor suggested he try mindfulness.
Right.
And so he did, and he wrote with Jeff Warren from Toronto. He wrote this wonderful book. So if you're just, I loved it.
Yeah. No, that's wonderful, actually, Christine. So Jeff Warren actually has guided meditations on the Calm app as well, where it's his versions of meditation are more casual. In some of them, he actually swears. He makes it really fun and enjoyable, because it needs to be a relatable activity, right? It's not something that needs to be structured and very rigorous and robust. It doesn't need to be that way, or rigid, right? It can be fun. So yeah, Jeff, he has some great meditations. Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
He would probably say whatever works for you, right? It's
exactly. Yeah.
So that sort of leads into with one more question that Janice has. Is there a better time to practice?
Mm-hmm. This is always a good question that always comes up. I suggest three different times, and then you can choose whichever works for you. One is in the morning, first thing you wake up, rather than grabbing your phone or watching the news, which kind of can sometimes throw you off or dictate your whole day. Use that first 5 to 10 minutes of your morning to do a meditation practice. That's a great time. Another one is nighttime, before you sleep, or in the evening, just as you wind down, you have your routine of, whatever you're doing before you sleep. Put your mindfulness meditation practice in there, and it can help you sleep better. And then the third one is wherever else it works for you in your day, wherever a consistent time. So it could be at lunchtime while you're at work. You have an hour break or a half an hour. Use 5-10 minutes of that to practice mindfulness. Or it could be after work. Let's say you finished an 8 to 4 shift, and before you go to your loved ones, your family, you do a 10-minute meditation or mindfulness practice to separate, right, your work to your home life. And then that's a good segue as well. So really, whatever works for you, as long as you're consistent.
Consistency
is key.
Is always key. Yeah.
Always.
Is always key.
Yeah.
I think I'm having some audio problems. I can see my little thing on my, anyway, sorry, let's go one last question. I don't know if you're going to be able to answer this.
Yep.
Kika has, it's going back to trying to get young people into the practice. Can you elaborate on influencing various ages to practice mindfulness? Any tips for teenagers? Oh, yeah. Teenagers. And young adults. So many people these days are chronically distracted and need help with focus.
Yeah. So, okay. So this is a good good question. And there's different types of apps and programs that are out there that are designed for, younger generations, young adults, kids as well. What I do want to point out is that mindfulness is not just, like I mentioned, sitting, breathing, and closing your eyes and just being still. You can do mindfulness during like a movement-based mindfulness, right? So for people that are more fidgety or distracted, or they need help kind of, they can't really sit there and sit still, you can do a mindful movement meditation, which is, you're focusing on gentle movements rather than focusing on your breathing. You focus on your movement. So that's a type we're going to practice later on in this series. But that's one way that you can do it. Hence, yoga is another form of mindful movement that people tend to enjoy because it's less, it requires them to actually move and not have to just sit there in silence, right? So there are different varieties of meditations and mindfulness. There's visualizations that some kids or young adults may enjoy, but again, it's about trial and error until you land on something that can work. But yeah, I hope that helps. Most people are chronically distracted, including myself, and we all need help with focus, but we can't really force or push someone to practice a certain type of mindfulness or meditation. We can always suggest it, try it out, see if it helps. We can never force someone or push someone to do it. Yeah, that would be my 2 cents.
Which is great advice. And as a parent of teenagers, maybe also try to model it, right? So if your
that's
kids,
a great way. Yeah.
If your kids see you doing it, maybe they'll be interested. I don't know.
I actually love that. Yeah, that's actually a good point, Christina. I just noticed. Yeah, I just remembered something. One of my colleagues, she's a psychologist at the clinic that I work at. She has kids, and what she does is she'll tell her kids, "Hey, give me 10 minutes. I'm going to go do my breathing and I'll be right back." So you're right. Like it's modeling that behavior. And then the kids kind of, realize that, hey, what is mom doing for 10 minutes? It becomes more normalized. Or, I'm going to do my mindful breathing, or, whatever you like to call it. Yeah. So I like that modeling good behavior. Yeah.
And it may not work.
Yeah.
Like it may not work at the very beginning.
Yeah. Yep.
But if you're consistent with your practice, and I'm going to try that with what your coworker said, by letting them know, maybe it might take a year or two, but eventually the kids might be like, "Oh, I wonder what this is all about."
Right. Yeah. That's right. That's right.
Anyway, we are well over an hour. So thank you, Shrey, for staying on. Thank you, everyone, for your wonderful questions. So that sort of concludes our mindfulness practice today and the talk. As mentioned, you will receive a recording of this. We hope you can join us next week at 12:15. We're back just to our 10 or 15 minute mindfulness session.
That's right.
That's continuing for another 7 weeks. So go enjoy your Friday afternoon and your weekend, and we'll see you again.
See you next Friday.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thank you for joining. Take care.